The sun hung low over the endless sagebrush plains of Wyoming, painting the sky in strokes of fiery orange and bruised purple, as if the heavens themselves were weeping for the secrets buried in the dust. Eliza Hawthorne, the preacher's daughter with eyes like fresh mountain streams and a heart unscarred by the world's cruelties, stood at the edge of the crumbling fence that bordered her family's modest ranch. At 22, she was a vision of quiet grace, hair the color of sun-bleached wheat tied back in a simple braid, her faded blue dress fluttering like a prayer in the evening breeze. But tonight, those eyes, usually alight with the unyielding faith of her father, Reverend Elias Hawthorne, were shadowed by a fear she could scarcely name. The ranch, once a beacon of God's provision for their small congregation, was slipping away. Drought had turned the fields to cracked earth, the cattle to skeletons wandering in search of mirage streams, and now the bank letters piled like accusations on the kitchen table. Her father, weakened by years of sermons delivered under leaky church roofs and a recent cough that rattled his frail frame, could no longer stand tall in the pulpit. "The Lord provides, Eliza," he'd whisper each night, his voice a threadbare hymn. But as she clutched the latest eviction notice, crumpled in her fist, Eliza wondered if provision came only after the breaking. It was then, in that fragile moment between despair and dawn, that he appeared, like a thunderhead rolling in from the horizon, unbidden and impossible to ignore. Boone Ryder, the powerful cowboy whose name echoed through the saloons and ranch houses from Cheyenne to Casper, rode up on his massive black stallion, Thunder, a beast as untamed as the man himself. Boone was a legend carved from the rawhide of the West, broad-shouldered, with hands calloused from roping steers that could uproot oaks, and a face weathered by winds that carried both fortune and fury. They said he'd built the largest spread in the county from nothing but grit and a borrowed bridle, amassing herds that numbered in the thousands and a reputation for fairness that made even the hardest outlaws tip their hats. Yet, for all his power, Boone carried a solitude deeper than the Powder River, widowed young, childless, his heart a locked corral since the fever took his wife a decade past. He wasn't one for church pews or preachers' daughters, his prayers were offered to the stars over a campfire, wordless and wild. Eliza had seen him once before, from the church steps, tossing coins into the collection plate with a nod that spoke more of obligation than belief. Now, as his shadow fell long across the fence, she straightened, her chin lifting in that defiant way her father had taught her, faith as armor, even when it chafed. "Miss Hawthorne," Boone rumbled, his voice like gravel under hoofbeats, dismounting with the ease of a man born to the saddle. He tipped his Stetson, revealing eyes the color of storm clouds, flecked with gold. "Heard about your pa. And the land. Folks in town, they talk." She bristled, the notice burning in her palm. "Talk is cheap, Mr. Ryder. Cheaper than the water we can't afford to pump." Her words were sharper than intended, honed by nights of whispered fears with her father, but Boone didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned against the fence, his gaze drifting to the skeletal remains of the Hawthorne windmill, its blades frozen like a broken promise. "Reckon it is," he said softly, almost to himself. "But I ain't here to talk. I'm here to offer a hand." He pulled a small pouch from his saddlebag, seeds, hardy varieties from his own fields, the kind that laughed at drought. "Plant these at dawn. They'll take root deeper than most. And—" He hesitated, then added, "I'll send a crew to fix that windmill come morning. No strings, Eliza. Just, neighbor to neighbor." Her breath caught, a knot of suspicion and gratitude twisting in her chest. Why him? The man who could buy half the county with a signature, who rode through life like a force of nature, untouched by the frailties that plagued ordinary folk. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above the wind's murmur. "You don't know us." "Not really." Boone's eyes met hers, holding a depth that made her feel seen, truly seen, for the first time in months. "Knew a preacher once," he said, his tone laced with an old ache. "Taught me that kindness ain't about knowing, it's about doing. Your pa's sermons, they stuck, even if I don't sit in the front row." He remounted Thunder with a fluid grace, the horse snorting as if in agreement. "One more thing," he called over his shoulder, a rare smile cracking the corner of his mouth. Ever ridden bareback? No saddle, no reins, just you and the horse, trusting the wind to guide you. Eliza shook her head, a flush creeping up her neck. Riding was for ranch hands and rebels, not for a girl raised on hymns and hemmed skirts. Sounds foolish, she replied, but there was a spark in her voice, the first flicker of something beyond survival. Not foolish, Boone said, his eyes twinkling like distant lightning. Freeing. I'll teach you, if you'll let me. Tomorrow, after the crew leaves. Meet me by the old oak at noon. With that, he spurred Thunder into a canter, vanishing into the twilight like a dream half-remembered. That night, as Eliza sat by her father's bedside, reading psalms by lamplight, the words blurred with unshed tears. The ranch might still fall, the bank unyielding as Pharaoh's heart, but Boone's offer lingered like a melody she couldn't shake. Kindness from a stranger, a cowboy of power and shadow, felt like a crack in the heavens, letting in a sliver of light. Little did she know, it was only the beginning of a ride that would bear not just her soul, but his. The next morning dawned crisp, the air sharp with the promise of change. Eliza rose before the roosters, her hands trembling as she scattered Boone's seeds into furrows clawed from the parched soil. By the time his crew arrived, 6 weathered men with hammers and hope in their tool belts, the first sprouts seemed to whisper encouragements from the earth. They worked like a well-oiled machine, voices low and laughter easy, sharing stories of Boone's exploits, the time he'd stared down a rustler gang with nothing but a stare and a steady hand, or how he'd turned his ranch into a haven for wayward souls, offering jobs to those the world had discarded. He's got a heart bigger than his spread, one murmured as he tightened a bolt on the windmill. But don't let him fool you, it's been locked up tighter than a bank vault since Mary passed. Eliza listened from the porch, stirring a pot of beans for their lunch, her mind wandering to the old oak. What madness was this? Learning to ride bareback from a man whose life was as untethered as the mustangs he broke. Yet, as the windmill creaked back to life, its blades slicing the air with renewed vigor, a quiet thrill stirred in her veins. For the first time since her mother's passing 5 years prior, Eliza felt the pull of possibility, not the scripted grace of sermons, but something wilder, more human. Noon found her there, under the sprawling arms of the ancient oak, its leaves rustling like pages in a sacred book. Boone was already waiting, Thunder grazing nearby, his coat gleaming like polished obsidian. He wore no chaps today, just a simple flannel shirt rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms etched with the scars of a life wrestled from the land. "Ready?" he asked, extending a hand that engulfed hers like warm leather. She nodded, heart pounding as he led her to Thunder. The stallion eyed her warily, nostrils flaring, but Boone's touch on his flank was a calming spell. "Bareback's about trust," he explained, his voice steady as the horizon. "No leather between you and the horse, no barriers at all. You feel every shift, every breath. It's scary at first, like stepping off a cliff. But then, you fly." With gentle insistence, he hoisted her onto Thunder's back, her legs dangling awkwardly, skirts hiked scandalously high. Eliza gripped the stallion's mane, her knuckles white, the world tilting in a dizzying sway. "I can't," she gasped, panic rising like bile. "You can," Boone countered, mounting behind her in one seamless motion, his chest a solid wall against her spine. "Close your eyes. Feel the heartbeat under you. That's life, Eliza. Raw and real." He clicked his tongue, and Thunder moved, first a walk, then a trot, the rhythm syncing with her own pulse. The wind whipped her hair free, tearing at the pins, and for a moment, terror clawed at her throat. But Boone's arms encircled her waist, not restraining, but guiding, like a father's hand on a child's first step, or a lover's promise unspoken. They rode in silence, the plains unfolding like a tapestry of gold and green, dotted with the first brave wildflowers defying the drought. Eliza's fear ebbed, replaced by a tentative joy, the horse's warmth seeping through her, grounding her in the now. Boone shared fragments of his world, tales of roundups under starlit skies, of calves born in blizzards that tested a man's soul. Power ain't in the land or the herds, Days blurred into a rhythm as steady as thunder's gate, each one weaving Eliza deeper into the fabric of Boone's world, and her own unraveling heart. The windmill spun tirelessly now, coaxing water from reluctant depths, and the seeds he'd gifted pushed tender green shoots skyward, a testament to resilience born of unlikely alliance. Reverend Hawthorne's cough eased under the doc's careful ministrations, funded by Boone's anonymous generosity, allowing him to resume his sermons with a vigor that filled the little church to bursting. "The Lord moves in mysterious ways," he proclaimed from the pulpit, his eyes twinkling knowingly at Eliza in the front row, as if divine intervention wore chaps and a Stetson. But Eliza knew the truth: it was human hands, calloused and kind, that had turned the tide. Their bareback lessons became ritual, stolen hours under the old oak where the world felt vast yet intimate. Boone was a patient teacher, his instructions laced with metaphors drawn from scripture he claimed to half remember. Like David facing Goliath, you gotta lean into the fear, let it fuel you. Eliza, once bound by the invisible reins of propriety and piety, discovered a wilder self, knees gripping Thunder's flanks with growing confidence, laughter spilling free as they galloped across meadows alive with the hum of returning life. Yet, beneath the exhilaration lurked an undercurrent of tension, a thread pulled taut by the ranch's lingering peril. The bank, unyielding as winter frost, had granted a month's reprieve, but the specter of auction loomed, whispers of speculators circling like vultures. It was on the seventh day, as goldenrod bloomed defiant along the creek, now trickling with the windmill's gift, that the unexpected turn shattered the fragile peace. They were riding at dusk, the sky a canvas of indigo streaked with the last embers of day, when Thunder shied violently at a rattlesnake coiled in the grass. The stallion reared, a whirlwind of muscle and panic, and Eliza, caught mid-laugh, her guard down, tumbled from his back. Time slowed, the ground rushed up, jagged rocks glinting like accusations, her body twisting in a futile bid for grace. Pain exploded as she hit, a sharp crack echoing in her ears, her ankle folding unnaturally beneath her. She lay there, wind knocked from her lungs, staring at the stars wheeling overhead, a sob choking her throat not from agony, but from the cruel irony, freedom's price paid in frailty. Boone was off Thunder in an instant, his face ashen, hands gentle as he cradled her. "Eliza, God, no, hold still." His voice cracked, raw with a terror she'd never glimpsed in the unflappable cowboy. He assessed the damage with practiced efficiency, binding her ankle with his bandana, but his eyes betrayed him, haunted, as if this fall echoed another, long buried. Scooping her into his arms, he carried her back to the ranch, Thunder trailing like a remorseful shadow. The miles stretched eternal, Eliza's head against his chest, listening to the thunder of his heart, a storm of unspoken grief. At the Hawthorne porch, lit by lantern glow, Reverend Elias met them with prayers on his lips and bandages at the ready. Boone lingered only long enough to ensure she was settled, his farewell a gruff murmur, "Should have known better. Blame me, not the horse." But as he turned to leave, Eliza's hand caught his sleeve, her voice a whisper fierce with realization. "It wasn't your fault, Boone. Or the snake's. Life, it bucks us all sometimes. You taught me that, trusting through the fall." He paused, the weight of her words settling like dew on parched earth. In her eyes, he saw not accusation, but understanding, a mirror to his own hidden wounds. For the first time since Mary's grave, Boone felt the lock on his heart creak open, just a fraction, enough to let in the light of possibility. The weeks that followed tested that fragile dawn. Eliza's ankle mended slowly, confining her to a rocker on the porch, where she watched Boone's crew transform the ranch, irrigation ditches carved like veins of hope, a new barn rising frame by frame. He visited daily, not as teacher now, but companion, bringing wildflowers pressed between pages of an old Bible, reading aloud from Proverbs with a halting reverence that charmed her father into approving smiles. Conversations deepened, peeling back layers like onion skin. Boone confessed the guilt that gnawed him, how he'd poured his grief into land and livestock, building an empire to outrun emptiness. "Power's a hollow horse," he admitted one evening, as fireflies danced in the gloaming. "Rides you, if you let it. Mary, she was my bareback ride. Free, till it ended too soon. Eliza shared her own shadows, the fear that faith was a fragile saddle, chafing against doubt, the loneliness of being the preacher's perfect daughter, flawless on the surface yet cracking within. "You showed me it's okay to fall," she said, her hand finding his across the porch rail. "To trust the hands that catch you." Their bond, forged in dust and dreams, drew sidelong glances from the town, whispers of the powerful cowboy and the innocent preacher's girl, a tale ripe for gossip. But Boone, ever the guardian of quiet generosities, paid them no mind. Instead, he orchestrated the climax of compassion that would redefine them all. With the month's grace ticking down, he gathered the ranchers of the valley, not in confrontation, but counsel. Under the harvest moon, by the church's weathered steeple, he stood before them, hat in hand, voice steady as bedrock. "The Hawthorns ain't just neighbors, they're the heart of this land. Elias preaches what we live, kindness in the lean times, selflessness when the herd thins. I've bought their note from the bank. Not to own, but to forgive. The ranch is theirs, free and clear. And if any man's got a stake in seeing it thrive, throw in with me, seeds, stock, sweat. For humanity's sake." Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by a swell of murmurs turning to cheers. Men who'd known hard winters stepped forward, pledging heifers and hours, their faces alight with the power of shared grace. Reverend Hawthorne, tears carving trails down his weathered cheeks, clasped Boone's shoulder. "Son, you've ridden bareback with the angels tonight." But the true emotional crest came later, in the hush of midnight, when Eliza, crutches cast aside, ankles strong enough for tentative steps, found Boone by the old oak. The valley lay spread below, lanterns flickering like stars fallen to earth, the ranch a silhouette of salvation. "You gave everything," she breathed, stepping into his arms, the world narrowing to the space between heartbeats. "Not for praise, but because, you could." Boone's embrace tightened, his voice a vow against her hair. "No, Eliza. Because of you. You taught this old cowboy that power ain't in holding on, it's in letting go. In trusting the ride, bareback and bold." As they stood there, silhouetted against the moon's silver glow, the wind carried their story across the plains, a whisper of kindness that rippled outward, reminding a weary world that humanity's greatest strength lies in its softest acts. In the days that followed, the ranch bloomed anew, alliances forged in forgiveness, and love, that most selfless of forces, took root between the powerful cowboy and the preacher's once innocent daughter. They rode together often, bareback under endless skies, not fleeing the past, but galloping toward a future unbound. And in every fall and rise, they found the profound truth: we are all, at heart, wild souls learning to trust the wind, and each other. For in a world quick to break, such compassion doesn't just heal, it inspires us to rise, to give, to ride on with hearts wide open. And so, under Wyoming's watchful stars, hope whispered eternal, the greatest journeys begin not with reins, but with released hands.